should always be there at the start of your day. I don't like warm-up, the word warm-up, because we don't warm up in the sense of the athlete, where when he does stretches and deep knee bends, if you put a temperature sensor on the knee joint, for instance, you'll actually find the athlete is accumulating more blood in the knee, and it is warming up because there's more blood in the region, and he is warming that region up so it's more pliable and can stretch further without doing damage. We have a magnificent blood supply in the lip at all times. We have excellent labial arteries. We have wonderful blood supply here. In other words, we need, you could call it warm-up if you like, we need practice in the beginning of the day when we first start out, where we couple ourselves to our instrument for our finest tone production, our finest sounds. Then we need to spread it through dynamics, and we need to spread it through range. But we need to find always our best. And then when we get into the workshop and really have to do some serious pounding and so forth, if there's any deterioration, our habits are still based on getting back that excellence every day.
Some people feel that practice time should be divided up in I don't know, in percentages. I can give you some examples of how Olympic athletes are trained. But a certain percentage of your practice time devoted to the physical aspect of whatever the technique is, the hands on the keys, practice. And then another portion of your practice time devoted to mental practice, hearing it in your mind, hearing it with your imagination, away from the instrument. What do you think about that?
It's not going to hurt.
Yeah.
I don't think the portion where you become aware physically for the musician needs to be very extensive.
Yeah.
I mean, you're holding a bass fiddle with, say, finger each half step, you know, and so you close the string in half steps and so forth. You get in front of the mirror, you examine this, and naturally you'll have to bring that into structure. The bow has to be parallel to the bridge and so forth. These should be taken care of and so forth. And these can be done in front of the mirror. It doesn't take a large percentage of time to do it, but it's something that should be done not a great deal at one time, but frequently.
Frequently,
so
during the time,
that it's being restored and referred to quite a number of times. But once the bow moves, then we have to begin to add, so you don't get into habits of mediocrity. So once there's function, then I don't like the just the physical aspect, because at that point, if there's function, I want standards established that you're shooting for. A human brain is easily competent to think of 2 or 3 items at the same time. You know, the genius level should up to 4 to 5 and so forth. But in other words, I would always ensure that anytime the bow moves, or if you're singing, that there is this thought, somebody is listening. I usually tell a student at my studio, there's a man outside the door, he's got a $90,000 a year job, and he's listening for a trombone player who can sound just great. That's if I have a trombone player in the chair. And you should hear the difference.
Boy, they perk up, don't they?
Other time I'll just simply say, if you've been to our concerts, have you heard Bud Hurst play this particular phrase? No. I have many important people coming by the studio. Let them think Bud's in this chair here, because I have many first trumpet players that come to see me. And so we use the psychology of motivation a great deal. But the standards go up in the brain, and then immediately the readout begins to improve in tissue function.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. The same thing in singing too. Now I did a little professional singing, but I could have had a full career as a singer when I was young. I was a radio announcer for a while and did quite a bit of work with sound and speech and general use of the voice. But it was such a fascinating subject, and I was so lousy at it at first because my teachers knew nothing about how to teach me. They really just practically ruined me because they're handling me like anybody else. And here I'm a tuba player, and when you don't tell a tuba player, support your, singer who plays an instrument line, support your tones and things, and getting me to get more and more physical all the time.
Yeah.
Here I mean, when I resolve the problems myself by backing everything off and coming down in the scale of efforts, and me just making sure that I didn't use the air, that I had it there, the vocal cords well needed and so forth.
Yes.
But it wasn't hard to figure out once I knew the structures. Then I could have, kept on with it. But these teachers didn't understand that at all.
And they kept trying to make you set more, it
this
seems.
one teacher's tighten your
Yeah,
buttocks
tighten this,
muscles, tighten this muscle, and more strength.
Support, yeah.
My God, I had so much more than could possibly be used, for anything. Yeah. In other words, I'm using 100 pounds of contraction here when I had needed maybe 6 or 8 ounces of internal pressure.
Pressure to go, yeah.
It's just ridiculous.
Oh my.
I found when I was running in place and jogging, I began to vocalize pretty well. I do deep knee bends and all, I get the high notes, everything was coming out. And it was all relaxed, and so I said, the hell with that, and I immediately started to do a lot of investigation and training myself, and worked very, very well.
So much more minimal effort
it wasn't
here.
It was a matter of coming down in the scale of applied efforts. And in muscle physiology, one of the first things you learn is that strength comes from the number of fibers that are being innervated in the motor system. Each fiber will have its maximal contracting power on innervation, and strength or weakness depends on how many fibers are contracted. And obviously, I was working hard, my goodness. And because, again, when you talk to a young man coming in for lessons who doesn't play an instrument like that, and that's one thing, but you get somebody like myself that was already a very successful tuba player and used to hard work. It just was not a good combination. But that's the thing. You have to always study the human being, what we're like in life.
Yeah, so true.
And then we adapt ourselves into these other forms. And if you're a mechanistic, and then learn to try to control the signal instead of going through the control panel, you try to control the machine. It's not successful. Everything that we do like that you look for the simple answers, save the complex answers for the emotions of music and the difficulties of musical techniques and nuance and all the problems that we have in our art form. That's where the difficulty comes for a musician. It should not be from his body.
From the technical part, wasn't it? Wouldn't it be wonderful if everyone taught like that?
Well, it'd be a lot easier and make a lot more sense, quite frankly.
No kidding.
When I hear these professionals on television talking about the diaphragm,
of course.
And I say they don't know what they're talking about.
How can you control that?
Well, it's easy to control the diaphragm if you control the breath.
Well,
you control the diaphragm.
But it's as if it's a muscle that you can just contract at will.
If you control the pressures, you control the diaphragm. In other words, if you control what the diaphragm does, then you will have control of the diaphragm. So you always work backward. In other words, you breathe to expand rather than expanding to breathe. And that goes through the whole product. You go for the results, and that should be there in athletics or in dancing or whatever. Sure, you've got the complexities of the exercises and the training, conditioning you have to go through, but you do it for the product, not the methodology of the body. And it's easy. You have to look for the answers now that are not complicated. During the week that you're here, I want to go through, this week, a great deal of work on finding the simple answers in your tone production, which means that you have to learn to come down on the scale of the complex thought of the adult into a child, where the playing becomes extremely simple, where the physical factors are involved. I want the adult intellect involved in the study of music, in the emotions of music, the rhythms of music, the sonorities of music. There I want the adult brain heavily involved in music and what it does with people and the ability to communicate and to be a performing artist. But where your body is concerned, I want you to think in terms of, oh, today the computer is so popular, of the software in the brain communicating to the hardware, where actually you have to begin to think the thoughts that are going to transfer down actually the seventh cranial nerve, gets to the lip, it becomes the motor nerve in the region of the lips. It becomes the motor nerve of the lip and transmits a electron flow, you might say, a signal of stimulus to the lip where you'll have a reflex response. And it's so simple because you don't really have to do very much. You have a wonderful control panel in the brain. When you think of control panels, and you think of anything that's, we'll say, mechanical or electronic and so forth, in the case of an automobile, which is very obvious because probably we all drive, you have a car, you have a very complex piece of machinery with its engine and transmission and all sorts of little parts that do funny things. And in the driver's compartment, there's a little dashboard. Usually there's a little something that operates turn signals and maybe window washers. And you put your foot on the gas and most of the cars go forward, or you might even have to shift. But you have all sorts of controls that take care of this complex machine. You don't have to know a thing about it. In fact, I had a car years ago. I bought a used car when I was with the Pittsburgh Orchestra. It was a LaSalle. In those days, I was a small Cadillac. And I didn't smoke, but my wife smoked. Anyway, after I bought the car and she approved it, she liked the car, says, "Where's the ashtray?" And I don't know. I don't smoke. So I bought her a little one that with a suction cup, and you slam it up there, and theoretically it's supposed to stay. I owned the car. About 2 years later, I walked by another LaSalle, and I saw a part of the dashboard sticking out. You push on the bottom of the dashboard, and a whole section of it swivels out, and that's an ashtray. Now, I really knew nothing about that until I saw one, but from then on, we found out we did have an ashtray. At the time I was driving that car, I was using that car, I was going through a set of controls that, even in spite of my ignorance of what was under the hood, and about ashtrays and everything else, I was quite proficient in going through traffic and reaching my destination. In other words, I had to know what I wanted that car to do. What was my accomplishment? And I needed to know that very, very much. But the communication to complex machinery was made very simple by a control panel in my brain. There's one for the body, which is much more complicated than the automobile, by far. Anyway, all machines have that. You always have systems of controls. Now the problem is that so many investigators have neglected the control system. They've gone to the study of the machine. Now the machine is enormously complex. Most of you have no idea. Dr. Nelson would, of course, that he takes care of this every day. But once you delve into the human body, you have layers of complexity just following one after another. When you think you've solved one, you know where there's a muscle, you know it's attached to a bone. When it contracts, it's going to move the bone. You think you've got it, except you don't got it at all. There's all sorts of other conditions in the neurological sense, that what makes the muscle contract, what tells it how far to go, how does it get its nutrition, and you keep a line of subjects that must be studied to really understand that machine going, which none of us in our art form need to know. I didn't know a thing about this, and I was a very fine player as a young man. You're a trumpeter. You are not a trumpet player. You are a fine musician who is using the trumpet as a medium of expression. In other words, you don't worry that much about the instrument. You worry about the music you play. The instrument becomes an extension of the player. After a period of a year or two, it's like part of it. You don't want to spend your years in combat, fighting the instrument and fighting yourself. There is a great joy in making music. I love my profession very, very much. I hated to leave it.
Schulte didn't want me to go. He wanted me to stay till this year when he retires. But not being able to see the music, it wasn't practical any longer.
I've had string players, you mentioned the cello player. I've had violinists come in. I was able to help one with a tremolo because he had arthritis and he was having terrible problems in the forearm. And so we started focusing this function based on the string and the hair of the bow where it functions. There again, we go to the product. What are you trying to accomplish? As he started working in this end, there was letting go of the muscles here. And pretty soon he was functioning very nicely with the fingers and the bow and without the tremendous contractions in the forearm, you know. So this is sort of a form of physiotherapy, and it can be applied in many, many different dimensions. And with music, I apply it the way I perceive it, you know, with the individual. After all, when you take whether it's trumpet or trombone or tuba, what does it take to vibrate a pair of chops? You don't have to have athletic strengths to vibrate the lip. You see what I mean? And yet the horn responds to the vibration of the lip on certain frequencies. It doesn't have to be right, you know, but it can still sound awfully good. So in, you know, simplifying this whole subject, my teaching, again, is to come down in the states of complexity to find the functions and the simplicity where they belong. You play with the use of air, of course. You play with the lip as a vibrating source. You play with the instrument based on the phenomena of music. But above everything else, you have to think within your art form.